The piston mechanism of the 1950s Pelican fountain pen was a minor miracle of German engineering, a simple, elegant solution to a complex problem. I slid the tiny silicone grease seal onto the piston rod, my movements precise and economical. In my world, elegance was efficiency. It was the shortest distance between a problem and its solution. My hands, steady and sure, worked under the warm glow of an architect's lamp, a stark contrast to the cool, blue light of the 3 monitors behind me. On them, the glowing nerve system of my life's work pulsed with silent data. Project Archimedes. I finished the reassembly. The polished black resin and green celluloid stripes felt warm and alive in my hand. I filled it with a dark iron gall ink, the scent of which was sharper and more real than anything else in my Spartan office. A test note in my journal, a smooth, wet line of perfect script. Control, precision, order. That was my sanctuary. Archimedes was the digital expression of that philosophy. It was more than a capital allocation engine. It was a monument to impartiality, a system designed to strip emotion, politics, and ego from the most important decisions a $10 billion conglomerate could make. It processed thousands of variables to produce one single, incorruptible truth, the optimal path to creating value. It was my legacy. Sloane Sterling had no appreciation for such things. I entered the pre-meeting conference room, a sterile glass box they called the Synergy Hub. Sloane was holding court, as usual. She wore a suit that probably cost more than my first car, tailored so sharply it looked less like fabric and more like a weaponized exoskeleton. Her teeth were impossibly white. Her laugh was a carefully modulated social signal, deployed to reward sycophantic junior executives. She was talking about leveraging brand harmonics, a phrase so utterly meaningless it felt like a physical assault on the language. She saw me and her smile tightened by a few microns, a predator's recalibration. "Alani, darling," she cooed, her voice dripping with the false warmth of a heat lamp. "Still playing with your little calculator?" The junior executives tittered obediently. I felt the familiar cold burn of the slight. It was one of 1,000 small cuts she had delivered since my work started to eclipse her influence. She had been my mentor once, a long time ago before her ambition curdled into a toxic need for dominance. Now she saw my devotion to data as a personal affront, a stubborn refusal to play her game of perception and politics. I handed her the preliminary report, a single page, dense with numbers. The market testing data for the Aura campaign is negative, Sloane. The control groups show a 7% decline in purchase intent. She glanced at it for less than a second, a pantomime of consideration. Then she waved a dismissive hand, the large diamond on her finger catching the light. The data is a conversation starter, Alani, not the final word. The real analytics happen in the C-suite. What she didn't understand was that data wasn't the start of a conversation. It was the conclusion. Her fatal flaw wasn't just arrogance. It was a profound, willful ignorance. She believed reality was something she could negotiate. The annual Capital Allocation Summit was held in the main boardroom on the 50th floor. It was a room designed to intimidate. All dark wood and black leather with a view of the city that made everything below look small and insignificant. The tension was thick enough to be measured in atmospheres. My team and I were up first. Our presentation was clean, concise, and brutal in its clarity. We showed the numbers. A high-risk, high-reward R&D project in sustainable materials had a projected return on investment of 10 times. Sloane's pet project, the massive Aura marketing campaign, had a projected return of 1.2 times. It would barely earn back its own cost. The numbers didn't lie. Then it was Sloane's turn. She didn't present data. She presented a narrative. A glossy, focus-grouped video filled the screen, a montage of beautiful people laughing in soft focus lighting, all while using her Aura line of consumer products. The soundtrack swelled. It was emotionally manipulative nonsense, and the executives around the table ate it up. Sloane stood, a vision of confident authority. "You're getting lost in the tactical weeds of the numbers," she said, gesturing vaguely at me without making eye contact. "I'm focused on the 30,000-foot view, on capturing hearts and minds. That's the metric that matters." I held my ground. "The data indicates this campaign will destroy value, Sloane." She turned her gaze to the CEO, an unimpressive man named Arthur Sterling, no relation, whose primary skill was avoiding difficult decisions. "Or," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "it indicates that our brand's emotional equity is an asset that an algorithm simply can't price." Arthur wilted under her confident gaze. He preferred a good story to a hard number every time. "The board values bold vision, Sloane," he mumbled. "The override is authorized." I felt a cold stillness settle over me. In that moment, it ceased to be a professional disagreement. It became personal. I waited for a beat of silence. "For the record," I said, my voice even and clear, "my office formally objects to this allocation. We request that our objection and the projected value loss be noted in the minutes." Sloane looked at me, and for the first time, she dropped the mask of mentorship. Her smile was pure reptilian triumph. "Duly noted." The next day, we were summoned by Human Resources. The official reason was creating divisional friction and obstructing strategic initiatives. Corporate speak for heresy. We were given cardboard boxes and 15 minutes. As my team and I walked the long, quiet hallway toward the elevators, I saw Sloane approaching. She didn't slow down. She didn't speak. She just walked past us, her eyes locking onto mine for a brief, searing moment. Her expression was one of absolute, pitiless victory. It was the most honest she had ever been with me. In the cavernous, echoing concrete of the company parking garage, my team gathered by their cars. 3 of the most brilliant financial analysts I had ever worked with, now unemployed. There were no tears, no angry outbursts, just a shared cold fury. Marcus, the youngest, kicked a tire softly. "So that's it?" I shook my head. "No," I said, my voice low but certain. "That's not it." They all looked at me. They had helped me build Archimedes. They knew its elegant architecture. They knew its ruthless logic. They knew that a system designed to be impartial doesn't just forget. What Sloane didn't understand was that in trying to steal my legacy, she had only armed it. Go home. Get some rest. Trust the system. They nodded. A silent pact. We were a unit, and we would wait. That night, in the quiet of my home office, I brewed a pot of single-estate Gyokuro tea. I heated the water to a precise 60 degrees Celsius and steeped the leaves for exactly 2 minutes. The ritual was calming, a small island of order. On my monitor, I pulled up the system architecture manual for Project Archimedes, a document hundreds of pages long, filled with dense technical specifications that I knew for a fact no executive, especially Sloane, had ever read. I scrolled deep into a subappendix of a subsection on system governance protocols, and there it was, a feature I had designed years ago, born from a deep-seated belief in accountability. It was called the integrity check. I had built the manual override function because I knew the executives would demand one, but I had also built a consequence. I had built this system with one hidden feature. If the override was used to divert funds from a higher-scoring project to a lower-scoring one, the system automatically created a shadow ledger. It calculated the precise difference in projected value between the algorithm's optimal choice and the executive's politically motivated one. This running tally was tagged as projected value loss from manual override. It wasn't a secret weapon. To my mind, it was just good design, an essential diagnostic tool. I never announced it because I assumed anyone bold enough to override the system would naturally want to measure the financial impact of their decision. I had failed to account for an ego so vast it was immune to self-reflection. I smiled, a small, grim curve of my lips. The trap wasn't something I had to set. Sloane had walked right into it and slammed the door shut behind her. All I had to do was wait for the end of the quarter. The following weeks were strangely peaceful. I didn't look for a new job. I didn't call lawyers. I tended my garden. I read books on economic history. I spent my days in my workshop meticulously restoring fountain pens. I took a broken, forgotten Waterman from the 1930s, its internal mechanism seized with dried ink. I carefully disassembled it, cleaning each tiny component, polishing the vulcanized rubber, retuning the delicate gold nib. It was an act of focus, of bringing order from chaos. It was intimate satisfaction. Every day I knew that deep within the company's servers, a single silent process was running. An incorruptible bit of code was tracking the consequences of Sloane's hubris, counting every dollar of shareholder value her ego was incinerating. I was preparing for the outcome, not fighting for it. From the outside, Sloane was triumphant. I saw her quoted in trade publications, talking about the bold new direction of the Aura campaign. Internal memos forwarded to me by friends still inside the company were filled with her self-congratulatory fluff about synergy and re-energizing the brand's core harmonics. She was living in her own press release, completely insulated from the reality of the balance sheet. She had won the political battle, and to her, that was the only battle that mattered. The first cracks appeared about 2 months in. I got a call from a contact in the sales department. He sounded worried. The Aura campaign was a dud. Sales were flat. Worse, in some key demographics, they were down. The massive marketing spend was a black hole, consuming millions with no measurable effect on revenue. I pictured the scene. Sloane in a sterile meeting room, confronted with spreadsheets she couldn't spin. Her narrative colliding with reality. My contact confirmed it. She had become defensive, blaming the sales team's lack of strategic alignment. She demanded more budget to amplify the message, the classic death spiral of a failing executive throwing good money after bad. Her panic was starting to show. She was trying to control a situation she had created without ever understanding the forces she had unleashed. And then the quarter ended. On the last day of September, at precisely 11:59 p.m., automated processes began to run deep within the company's data centers. I imagined the server lights blinking in the cold, dark room. Project Archimedes began compiling the data from thousands of sources across the globe. It ran its final calculations, reconciling sales figures, marketing expenditures, and operational costs. It generated the quarterly financial reports, the sacred texts that would be presented to the board of directors. And as part of its routine, a single elegant line of code executed. It queried the shadow ledger created by the integrity check protocol. It pulled the final calculated number, and it inserted a new line item into the executive summary page of the board's report. The collapse of Sloane Sterling's reputation was now compiled, formatted, and waiting patiently in a secure PDF file. The quarterly board meeting was, by all accounts, a routine affair. The CFO, a dry, methodical man named Peterson, walked the board through the financials. Revenue was slightly down. Margins were a little tight. Nothing catastrophic. I had a source on the inside, a junior analyst who owed me a favor, feeding me a play-by-play via text. For 45 minutes, it was the usual corporate drone. Then Peterson got to the executive summary page. My phone buzzed. The text read, "Peterson just stopped. He looks confused." I could picture it perfectly. The sterile boardroom. The smell of expensive coffee and quiet desperation. Peterson squinting at the large screen where the report was projected. "Apologies," he would have said, his reedy voice echoing slightly in the silent room. "There seems to be a new data field here I haven't seen before. Projected value loss from manual Q2 capital override." My source's next text was a single sentence. Holy crap, he just said the number. $212 million. $212 million. The number hung in the air like the smell of smoke. A vast, incomprehensible sum of value gone. My source described the scene. A heavy, shocked silence. every single head in the room, from the ancient chairman to the newest board member, turned as one to stare at Sloane Sterling. The look on her face when she realized. It wasn't just confusion, it was the sudden sickening vertigo of a person who discovers the solid ground beneath their feet is an illusion. She went pale. My source said she looked like she had been physically struck. She stammered, her usual confident cadence gone, replaced by a panicked, brittle defense. "That must be a glitch in the model," she said. "A theoretical, academic exercise. It's not a real number." But her narrative power was gone. In that room, numbers were the only reality. Peterson, a man who lived and died by verifiable data, was no longer just a presenter. He was an investigator. "Let's see," he said, his curiosity piqued. He clicked through to the data appendix, a section of the report no one ever looked at. The system, my system, had automatically generated a full audit trail. It showed the original recommendation from Archimedes. It showed the manual override, time-stamped with her name and the CEO's name right next to it. It showed the flow of funds to her underperforming Aura campaign, and it showed, with cold mathematical precision, exactly how the $212 million figure was calculated. Her fatal error was laid bare for everyone to see. She was exposed not by a political rival, but by the impartial truth of a system she had dismissed as a little calculator. I watched her world collapse in real time through the tiny screen of my phone. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Sloane Sterling was fired that afternoon for gross financial mismanagement. Arthur Sterling, the CEO who enabled her, was publicly censured and stripped of his annual bonus. The fallout from the $212 million figure was a reputational nuke from which they would never recover. But the board had a bigger, more terrifying realization. They had been flying blind, making critical decisions based on charisma and politics. They were vulnerable. A week later, I received a call. It was the chairman of the board himself. He didn't apologize. Men like him don't. But his voice was heavy with a new kind of respect. He told me the board had approved the creation of a new, independent strategic finance office. It would report directly to the board, not the CEO. It would have ultimate authority to oversee and approve all major capital allocations across the entire conglomerate. It was a position of immense power created from the wreckage of Sloane's career, and he was offering it to me, to run it with my entire team at salaries that made our previous compensation look like a rounding error. I calmly accepted. My Phoenix victory was complete. A month later, I was sitting in my new corner office. It was twice the size of my old one, with a view that stretched to the horizon. I was signing a major funding approval document, not with a cheap corporate ballpoint, but with my perfectly restored 1930s Waterman. The ink flowed smoothly, a satisfying dark line on the paper. My assistant buzzed. A top-tier executive recruiter was on the line. I took the call. The recruiter was polite, professional, and representing a client I knew was desperately trying to salvage her career, Sloane Sterling. "We were hoping you might provide a reference for Ms. Sterling's strategic capabilities," the recruiter said, his voice hopeful. I leaned back in my chair, a flicker of a smile playing on my lips. I looked out at my new view, at the city sprawling beneath me. My tone was perfectly neutral, perfectly professional, the voice of pure, objective analysis. "Sloane has an unparalleled gift for crafting a compelling brand narrative," I said calmly. "However, when it comes to financial stewardship, our system's final analysis of her tenure here showed that her last major strategic decision resulted in a projected value loss of $212 million. I let the number hang in the air between us, a monument to her failure. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the recruiter's quiet, sharp intake of breath. "I see," he finally managed to say. "Thank you for your time, Dr. Vieri." The line clicked dead. I hung up the phone. My revenge wasn't loud or emotional. It was a single, precise, and irrefutable number. The only kind of victory I would ever truly savor.